Oh my goodness. Okay, I was recording for the last 7 minutes with my microphone off, and I was getting into a really good flow. I was okay. Well, yes, I'm gonna start again. So basically, I would like to talk about Inside Out 2, the movie, and parallel it with Volume, the game, and how I feel like okay. So the main like basic sort of parallel to make is like obviously the spatial component where like the character or the characters within Inside Out 2, like the emotions, are traversing like this wide uh, like megalith kind of space, being kind of like analogous to the brain, I guess, where there's like a control center, and then there's like an elevator to other parts of presumably the brain, I'm guessing. And then here in Volume, you're traversing like mostly concrete megalith, more megastructures. And by the way, I feel that megastructures as a term is probably going to be phased out in 2027 for whatever reason. I just have that feeling. Like even now, I feel weird about using the term megastructure late in 2026. But anyway, that's beside the point. Um, I think Inside Out 2 is a very interesting movie, and I think again the basic parallel between that and this game would be like the exploring the wide spaces, and how I think there is an aspect of like wandering through through large spaces that has an effect on like like stream of consciousness or like internal monologues and things like that. I mean, obviously, all I'm trying to suggest is like, for me at least, I feel like I get into a very kind of different headspace when if you were to ask me to like internally monologue and vocalize it while I'm like sitting down in a chair, and also and alternatively, if you were to ask me to like internally monologue and convey that while I'm like walking through an airport or something, it would be kind of different for obvious reasons. And so yeah, I guess I don't know why I'm trying to make this like heavy-handed parallel between Inside Out 2 and Volume, but it's just what's been on my mind because I was at an airport for literally 14 hours, like a day ago. I was just like wandering the airport waiting for my flight. Why was I wandering for 14 hours? Because it was a transfer flight, and I didn't know that it was going to be like 14 hours between connecting flights. Um, so, anyways, I was literally like sleep deprived to begin with because I didn't like sleep well for the past 2 days prior to that. And so here I was wandering a very large airport with a very heavy backpack, like constantly. And I was just like walking from like the ends of the airport, like constantly. And then I would take like little breaks here and there and charge my phone, and like I would go to the cafeteria, order some food, charge my phone, get up, and then walk to this like tea shop that was like legitimately like a 30-minute walk from the cafeteria, and get some caffeine there, and then like wander around a little bit, and then go back to the cafeteria to charge my phone. And I would just like continuously do this, all the while being like kind of sleep deprived. And I also feel like I was like in a manic, not in a manic mood, but in like a manic light mood, where for some reason I just had like a bunch of racing thoughts constantly about like everything. Anyways. So when I finally got onto the plane, I still felt like I couldn't really sleep. So I was like looking or scrolling through the movies, and I saw Inside Out 2 just happened to catch my eye for whatever reason. And I didn't watch Inside Out 1, which I heard is probably a lot better. But I was like, oh, whatever. I kind of like animation sometimes. And so I was like, yeah, let's put this on. And so, okay, here's where I finally give my impressions of Inside Out 2, the movie, in terms of its themes regarding, like, social cliques, I guess, and, like, friend groups. Because I feel like, for me at least, the movie is a little bit vague in terms of its messaging. regarding like social cliques and friend groups and things like that. And I know a lot of people are probably like, how could it be vague? It's very clear. Actually, maybe not. Maybe some people. Maybe there's like a pretty significant amount of people that also feel similarly confused about what like the messaging of the movie was supposed to be. And so, I to be honest, I almost feel like the social friend group clique thing feels heavy-handed and forced for socio-political reasons that I'm not really going to get into right now. And I think that's probably why. That is probably why, to me at least, the messaging and the feel of the movie it just felt kind of like weird, I guess. And I wouldn't say like contradictory because yes, on one hand, so on one hand, the main character, like it's understandable, I guess, that the main character finds themselves at a new high school and her two original besties go to a different high school, and how this does seem to be like not an uncommon theme. Like certainly this can happen to anybody, sort of, probably. And how you'd find yourself in like a new environment and new social groups as a result of that. But again, it's one of those things where like the movie presents this very immediate central tension point, which is like, okay, do you as the main character choose to retain your original bestie friend group promises of always being together and playing on the same team, hockey team or whatever, and it's like, yeah, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge when your two besties move to a entirely different high school, and you're literally on separate teams of like hockey teams or whatever. And then it's like, okay, do you instead choose to integrate with the new clique, the new social group that also happens to be like really swag and really cool, and they have like cool dyed hair and things like that. And this is the point where I'm just like unsure what the movie was trying to say. Like, I think the movie was trying to say, yeah, that is what you do. You just like forget about your besties and then try to integrate as best as you can into this new social environment. And I know that's not like very explicitly what the movie was suggesting, but that almost just feels like what the tone of the movie was sort of implying, I guess. And this is why I feel like tone and how specific scenes are expressed are very important in things like a movie or a show. Not that movies or shows are that important usually, but for example, there was a scene earlier on in the movie where it was just like depicting the main character, going in their imagination. They were like experiencing intense anxiety and embarrassment and like a ton of like what if scenarios, like, oh no, what if I mess up this social interaction with this new group of people at high school and my life just somehow ends up like, it literally went from like, okay, the character messes up one social interaction in their new high school clique, to they start failing like all of their classes and like drop out of high school. 3, they reach the elder stage of their life cycle and have learned to befriend the animals. So even like this scene alone just feels like really weird, and like I'm not entirely sure, because like, first of all, I think befriending animals is like really awesome. And second of all, again, it's more of a matter of like tonal representation, where even though it like presents this scenario as like being absurd, like, oh, this is just like some student's absurd sort of imagination or rumination on like the worst case scenario kind of thing, the tone it was presented in feels like it outweighs any sort of like like ridiculousness or over the topness that the scene was trying to imply. So I feel like I'm just like explaining this in a very weird way, but I feel like the purpose of that scene was to suggest that it is obviously very over the top and silly for a character to jump from like one conclusion to another in like a worst case scenario possible kind of way, where it's like, oh yeah, I failed this one social interaction and I'm like doomed forever. But the way that that this part was like expressed, like in terms of animation, sound design, everything, almost makes it feel like that is the case, where because these things are expressed in such a clear way, it almost feels like it suggests to the audience like that is more meaningful to the audience, and that kind of scene sticks out more within an audience member's head, because there wasn't really anything in the moment explicitly suggesting otherwise, I feel like. So I'm just trying to imagine myself as maybe a younger watcher, where I'm going through the scene, and psychologically or like in my subconsciousness, on one hand I might be like, yeah, this is kind of ridiculous, obviously in a rational way this probably isn't going to happen. But I think subconsciously I'm like, wait a minute, they have a point. Like there was so much effort put behind this scene and how it was depicted and how like embarrassed and how agonizing everything could go, if this like one thing, if this like one social interaction turned out poorly, that I feel like it sticks out more in my head, where like I retain that kind of scene more for the wrong reasons. And I don't know if this makes sense or not, but I think that's the point that I'm trying to get at, is that the movie to me felt like it just had a lot of parts like this where it's like suggesting like ideal sort of like proverbial scenarios and circumstances where it's like, yeah, you should do this or you shouldn't do that. But on the other hand, the way it's like expressed or depicted, it almost feels like directly in contradiction with the moral messaging of those scenes. And I mean, I guess that is my point for the most part of the movie, and that's probably the part that I take issue with the most. And you can say on one hand, like, why does it matter that much? Yeah, this is like a huge, big budget sort of movie that is like appealing to like families and stuff like that, and it is not really like, no one's probably like thinking about it like that much. But I mean, to me, that's exactly the point, where it's the sort of thing that's being broadcasted to a lot of people, and I just feel like a lot of people are going to be left feeling very confused about what the point of the movie was. And I guess the point of the movie is that, well, I guess it depends again. I think there are different takeaways that people will have regarding the movie, and it'd be interesting to hear other people's opinion on it. But it's one of those things where like, I don't know if there's much of an overlap, to be honest, between people that like this game, Vholume, and people that also feel somewhat strongly, not strongly, but feel anything towards the movie InsideOut2. It just so happened to be that like that was a movie I watched yesterday on my flight, so I guess that's just what's on my mind currently. What else was I gonna say? Oh, okay, well, I guess I can like okay, I'm just gonna talk about it more. So InsideOut2 feels like an, okay, if I were to like make a video essay out of it, like if I had to, I would make up something like InsideOut2, the bureau brutalist nightmare of managing emotions, or something like that. Where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of like red tape. I'm sure there was probably a scene that like very heavily handedly like included red tape or something, like literally in the scene. I'm sure there was, maybe. But anyways, I almost for some reason feel like this game, I'm finally talking about Volume, has something like that where it's like, you know what this game is starting to feel like to me? It's starting to feel a little bit like that. I think it was like an Onion article from a long time ago. That was like, guy that is fiercely anti-war has to admit that 50 caliber snipers are really sick. And this isn't like quite as much like that. I don't think it's like that definite, but to me this feels like a team of developers that are like fiercely against fiercely like in opposition towards like a rat race, linear track career, government career sort of lifestyle. But has to admit that like the architecture that that is like associated with that kind of society or culture is pretty cool, is like pretty sick. Like the term like Soviet blocks kind of is evoked when I'm looking at this game, like literally just a lot of blocks, and a lot to do with like, I guess very very idealistic like efficient systems, and a lot of like 90-degree, just very blocky, I guess, very blocky Minecraft-esque redstone sort of like, oh, I programmed a 64-bit computer that could play Tetris and Minecraft, or like, oh, I have this like completely unethical Minecraft farming factory that like auto spawns pigs and cows and distributes them into like specific chests and stuff. Which, by the way, if you're that type of person, I would be a little bit worried. But anyways, yeah, this to me feels like team of developers that is opposed to very rigid human working conditions, that also has to admit that like the architecture that facilitates that kind of those kind of conditions is really cool. It looks amazing. Like it looks really sick. And yes, I partially agree. Like I guess the moral of the story is like, oh, people are contradictory. People have to like learn to merge their contradictions and stuff like that. So, okay, so I will say what saves this a little bit from that kind of theme or thematic sort of presentation, which I'm just totally making up, is that it is like a sort of like, it does sort of like opt for like that crumbling infrastructure sort of like thing, like post-apocalyptic wandering of like a megastructure, where you can see how things there was like an idealistic maybe golden age where things just worked out sort of somewhat okayly, but then over time like the scope of the environment just became a little bit too complicated, and so then you get to see like collapse happening. And I feel like there's been a lot of revivals of that genre for like the past half century or so. And I guess what's interesting, I guess, about this game is that you literally get to explore it in like a first-person sort of platforming thing, and that's like the only redeeming quality that this genre has at this point, because it's been done to death, and the only like redeeming qualities of this kind of genre, like crumbling megastructure sort of exploratory sort of thing, is like, oh, okay, you get to like at least like just you get to like go through it, I guess, in a first person video game. and that is actually like the only thing that this genre has left at this point, I think, or I feel. And I suppose might have been like the natural conclusion of this genre, because I don't really care for it anymore. Like I think beyond its like aesthetic qualities, there is nothing very compelling anymore or interesting about setting where like a character or two characters or a group of characters wander like a post-apocalyptic megastructure kind of thing, where they like, it's like it like combines aspects of like survival, the survival genre, and like philosophical musings about random stuff about like the human condition or whatever. It's just, I think that there's been a little bit of an oversaturation of this kind of thing, and also it just I think it's not even that it doesn't go anywhere. I think it's just there are other things that are more worthwhile topics, I think, at this point for me. What they are, I don't know, but yeah, I guess those are my thoughts and impressions so far about Inside Out 2 and Volume. Hope that helps. I feel like I should just switch to another topic because this has been going on for way too long. But this level is really cool, by the way. I like this section a lot. Okay, how am I going to get past this part? I think I go here. And then here. I like this level. It really does feel like you have to consider the pathing a little bit more. I almost want to talk about another game that I was sort of looking forward to, and I think has some interesting parts, but okay, there's another game called, what is it called? Something Lorne. Lost Lorne? I don't know, it was something like that. But anyway, it was also a sort of first person kind of huge space exploratory kind of game. And I think it is designed really, okay, no, I'm going to say some aspects of the design are pretty cool. What I think feels strange, like what I feel that game sort of lacks is like a sort of like focus and more conciseness and brevity that this game has, where I think the problem with that game is that the scope of it was a little bit too large, and like the megastructure got a little bit too megastructure-y, where it was literally like you exploring an extremely large open map kind of thing. It wasn't like necessarily open world, but I just, what am I trying to get at? Also, I think it was just one person developing that game, so I guess I'm gonna give him a little bit of credit there. But maybe I'll just stop the video here, because I feel like I'm just like meandering for things to say. I'm like evidently still kind of like caught up on like Inside Out 2 and it's like ambiguous themes for whatever reason. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop the video here, and then maybe, oh, here we go. Here's crumbling megastructure but also featuring like plant overgrowth, like the reclamation of nature. It looks really cool though. Anyways, I think I will stop here and then continue on with like the last third of the levels in another recording.